In today's video, we're checking out 5 different portable battery-powered vacuum pumps. We're looking at a really affordable way to do veneer vacuum clamping, doing a little material science, and looking at some ways of holding workpieces that's almost mind-boggling. Air is a pretty big part of our lives, and we sometimes take it for granted. We do things like have personal filter devices to keep our lungs safe when we're in dangerous environments.
This thing is awesome.
We use devices to filter the air in our entire shops to keep the air cleaner. We use it for vacuums, and we compress it to run tools and to blow things off. And we also use it to vacuum, like this big vacuum pump that helps me hold materials down to my CNC. But there are other types of vacuum pumps that are much smaller, much more affordable, and much more portable. So to get everybody on the same page, we need to understand what vacuum clamping actually is, and most people get it wrong. So if I have a slab sitting on my table, it's pretty easy to push around. If I want to make it harder to push around, I can put some weight on it. So with Maggie sitting on it, there's a little bit of extra weight on this. Now it makes it much more difficult for me to move the slab. I can still move it though. So with Maggie sitting on the slab, she put more pressure down on the slab, which made it more difficult to move. And that's actually what's happening when you're vacuum clamping something. The slab isn't being sucked down to the vacuum device, it's being pushed against it. Now, a vacuum pump removes the atmosphere between the vacuum puck and the slab, and the atmospheric pressure, which at sea level is 14.7 pounds per square inch, is pushing down on the slab. So the atmosphere is putting pressure on the slab and pushing it against the device. For a frame of reference, one of these STM vacuum pucks on pine is the equivalent of 2 Maggies. 2 of them is the equivalent of 4 Maggies. And let's face it, they take up a lot less room than a Maggie does. To make it as simple as possible, you can calculate your holding strength by your area times PSI equals your holding strength. So if you have a 10 by 10 square area times, say, 10 PSI, that's 1,000 pounds of holding strength. The more square inches, the more hold or pressure you're getting. See, I told you I'm under more pressure than you are. Now, vacuum pumps are at the heart of making all of this stuff work. And we're testing 5 battery-powered vacuum pumps today, and we're starting with this kind of off-brand vacuum pump that works with a DeWalt battery. And I paid about $109 for it on Amazon. Now, we've only used it a little, but it does pull a 13.9 PSI vacuum, which is pretty impressive. But given its cost, I'm not sure how well it's going to work over a long period of time. Now, the Makita, if you buy it off Amazon, you're going to spend $500 on it for just the tool. I found one on eBay for just over $300. Again, this one's pulling 13.9 PSI, and it's Makita, so you know there's going to be some reliability there. The next vacuum pump we're testing is the Hercules. Now, we haven't had the best experience with the Hercules. We burnt up the first one we had in short order. We went and got a second one, and the second one's been performing pretty good for us. Now, this one's pulling a little less PSI at about 12.3 pounds, but we've run this one for hours and had no problems with it. Now, we're going to switch it up a little bit, and we're going to move over to the Grabos. The DeWalt Grabo here fits on our vacuum plates that we sell, and it turns the Grabos into a vacuum pump. Now, a couple things you're going to notice. These work a little slower, so it takes a little bit longer to build up to the PSI, and they don't get quite as high. So this DeWalt Grabo is pulling at about 11.8 PSI, but it's doing that pretty consistently, and our test setup is a pretty good, sealed system, so we get real consistent results with it. Now, this one's going to run you about 250 without the battery, and with the batteries, it's going to be right in the 325 range. Now, Old Faithful, the Grabo Pro, we're going to try that one next. And this one's going to pull about 11.9 or 11.8 PSI. And now this one operates a little bit faster than the DeWalt Grabo does, and it's pretty consistent at that 11.8, 11.9 PSI. Now this one is going to run you just over 300 with one battery, and I think there's a Pro kit you can buy that's a little bit more for like 350. Now, the vacuum pumps we looked at are great, but there's a couple of problems with them. First of all, you got to always keep the oil levels up and you got to check them frequently. The other side is if they get hot, you really kind of start smelling that oil. And we really prefer the Grabos for our vacuum setup just because they're multi-purpose. We're not using them for one thing in particular. Our Grabos get used constantly around the shop for moving things, moving plywood, avoiding splinters. They're really quite handy to have, and the fact that we can turn them into vacuum pumps makes them even more valuable to us. I want to take this chance real quick to talk about a few more details about the vacuum plate and the vacuum puck that we make and sell. It turns your Grabo into a vacuum pump, and then we also sell the vacuum pucks that work with this system or with any other vacuum pump. Now, first of all, let's talk about the pucks. We make these out of 1-inch HDPE, so they're really durable. In fact, you can run these over with your car. The reason I know that is because we've done it a few times, picked it up, and went right back to using it. In fact, this is the one we ran over a couple of times. Another unique thing that we did with this is to make sure that no matter what, you can still use this even if like the seal goes bad on it or you run into it with a router bit or something like that. This seal is replaceable. Now, in a pinch, you can run down to any hardware store, Home Depot or Lowe's, and you can pick up this stuff. This is called backer rod. This is the 3/8 backer rod. It costs about 10 to, I don't know, 20 cents a foot. And it can replace this seal in a pinch while you're waiting for your new seals to show up. So you'll always be able to use these things no matter what happens. The other real benefit of having these 1-inch tall is it gets it off your work surface. So if you're running a saw or you're cutting material with a circular saw, or if you're routering something like a 1/2-inch thick material, it gets that material off the bed far enough that your blade and your bearings won't interfere with your bench top, which is a really nice feature. The reason our vacuum pucks are all elongated instead of square or round is you only need 2 to hold large panels. And if you're holding thin material, you can hold it sideways. You just take 2 of them and put them next to each other for holding panel material, and that is plenty stable to hold all those things. So instead of having to have 4 pucks and 4 lines to deal with, you're only dealing with 1 or 2 pucks and 1 or 2 lines, which is a lot nicer when you're having to run lines in your surfaces. The other thing you want to keep in mind is like the STM puck, this one right here, at an optimal of negative 12 psi, this is going to have about 230 pounds of holding pressure. And the MFTs, which is the vacuum pucks we sell that align with your traditional multifunction table 96 millimeter holes, those are going to have slightly more at about 235 pounds per puck. And you can do some pretty crazy things with that. We've been talking a lot about vacuum clamping, and we're going to hit some other things that you can do with vacuum pumps as well. But I want to talk about the only real Achilles heel for vacuum pump clamping, and that's porosity. So on our test setup here, you can see that the Grabo is pulling 11.8, 11.9 PSI, and that's on HDPE, and we've got a really good seal on the system. But let's try some other materials. So we use all kinds of different woods in the shop, and I think it's important that we give it a shot. Now, the one thing that I would recommend that you don't try and do is use MDF to create vacuum pucks. Now, MDF is great on CNCs to pull vacuums through, but you just can't get enough hold or clamping pressure on it to do anything really functional with it. Now, you can definitely hold a panel down in a horizontal format on a sanding table or something, but that's as far as I would go. This is unsanded MDF. We have tried with sanded, and sanded is even worse, down to like 2 pounds of holding pressure. So anytime you introduce MDF into a vacuum system, it's gonna leak air and you're not gonna get a great hold. But now let's take something like this inexpensive plywood that we got. It's got pre-finished on one side. It's not finished on the side that we're pulling a vacuum on, but we're getting 7.5 PSI, which is pretty substantial. So if you're in a 10 by 10 area, that's 700 pounds of holding pressure. That's pretty good. Here we're going to shoot pine. Now this is something that we use a lot in the shop, and we use vacuum clamping on it all the time, and we're pulling almost 11 PSI on store-bought pine wood that's pretty common in all the big box stores. Next up, we're doing Baltic birch. Now this is a overseas Baltic birch, but you can see we're still pulling 8 pounds of pressure. So again, that equation is area times negative PSI equals your holding capacity. So you want to be aware of that when you're trying different materials on vacuum clamping. If you get something that's really porous, you're not going to get a really good vacuum. And that's really important to keep in mind. Now, 99% of the woods and materials that we use in the shop work really well for vacuum clamping. Now, if you're just getting started in woodworking, you may not have seen some of these things, but vacuum systems are pretty common in a lot of woodworking situations. For instance, you can degas fluids pretty easily with this, which is really nice. You can also do some hardening. So you can put pithy wood in a vacuum chamber like this, and with some cactus juice in it, it'll pull all that fluid into the pithy wood, and when it dries, it's really hard. Now, vacuum clamping technology isn't new. It was invented in 1650. It's been used in factories since the 1950s for moving all kinds of things around, including even really tiny small parts. Another technology that's pretty common in the woodworking shop is vacuum bag clamping. So you put 2 pieces of material in a vacuum bag, hit it with the vacuum, and that bag clamps those materials together, and it does a really nice job of covering the whole surface. But something I've always wanted to try is using one of those clothes vacuum bags that comes with these inexpensive vacuum bags that I buy for clothes. Not for woodworking, but they work great. So I wanted to try that clothes vacuum pump, and I'm going to try the Grabo as a vacuum pump and do some veneering and just kind of test it and see how it all turns out. Now, to make this work, I had to modify the cap so it would fit one of the 1/4 push connectors so we could attach the Grabo vacuum pump to it. And then we're going to glue up some sapelli and some walnut and try this and see if it works. Now, right off the bat, I have to tell you, I was pretty impressed with that little closed vacuum pump. Not what it's designed for by any stretch of the imagination, but after I put it in the bag and turned that sucker on, I actually got some decent squeeze out from the edges. We're off to a good start with this little inexpensive closed vacuum. Next up, we're going to glue a piece of walnut veneer to a piece of plywood, and we're going to try the Grabo as well. Now, I can tell you right off the bat, it achieved a much greater vacuum, and there was a lot more glue squeeze out, so I knew this was doing what it was supposed to do. And I will tell you, after about 5-10 minutes, that closed vacuum bag that we had stopped pulling a vacuum on kind of started to lose some of its clamping force, so we had to come back about every 10 minutes and hit it again. Now stick around to the end of the video and we'll take a look at the results. In the last 6 months, we've adapted vacuum clamping in a lot of different areas in our shop. One of my favorite areas is in the sanding cart. We used to have this big sanding area in an adjacent room. Now everything that we had in there sits on this surf prep sanding cart. Now with the vacuum clamps, we're able to vacuum down large panels, thin material, really long material, and it holds it really securely. So we have our entire sanding setup now in this small format on the cart that we can just push out of the way when we're not using it. Now we do have a foot pedal on here, so that makes readjusting and flipping panels over or boards over really quick and easy. And I gotta tell you, I am loving this setup. It is hands down the best sanding setup I've ever used. The other real advantage to having these vacuum clamps on our sanding cart is that it works as a second workbench. So when we're running milling operations, routing, doing other things, we can do it right here as well, which makes this kind of a double down. It makes it our sanding cart and a secondary work surface, which is really handy in a small shop. So over the past few years, and definitely in the last 6 months, we've really started living that vacuum clamping life. And I realize that sounds silly, but it's been pretty profound for us. It's really changed our workflow and how fast we can get things done and how quickly we can change from one position to a next position or one operation to another operation. So definitely wanted to do more of a dedicated video and share with you some of the ways that we're using it. I also want to mention that helmet that I'm wearing right there is a microclimate helmet. They're new to the market, and I got to tell you, absolutely the best forced air filter I've ever used. It's very comfortable. It works really well, no fogging up, and of course you can wear glasses and have a big old beard, and it's priced way under those really expensive units that you've seen out there that are similar, but this one doesn't have the hose, which I absolutely love. In fact, it's so comfortable, sometimes I forget I'm wearing it. The results of our vacuum bag test were very interesting. So on the Sapelli, where we just used the little closed vacuum pump that came with those vacuum bags, I got 15 vacuum bags in this pump for I think it's like 40 bucks. It did way better than I expected it to. The center is really nice. There's a couple spots on the edges, and I don't know if that was the vacuum pump, or maybe I just didn't get enough glue there. So it did a pretty good job. I would definitely do this if I was in a pinch. Now, I'm not sure how it would perform on a contoured surface, which is typically what you use when you're vacuum bagging for, or vacuum bagging clamping. It's a mouthful. Now, on the version where we use the Grabo as a vacuum pump, yeah, it's definitely rock solid all the way through it. So, preferred method in a pinch method, but I would still do that. I wasn't thinking it was going to work at all, and it actually did pretty good. So yeah, it's a thing. As you can tell, I'm head over heels about vacuum clamping. Basically, using air or atmosphere to clamp material is really a great way of doing it. And the more we get into this, the more and more things that we find that we can use these for. And it's definitely changed a lot of the way we process material and handle material here in the shop. So if you haven't jumped on that bandwagon yet and tried it, I would really encourage you to. Now, as far as cost goes, if you have a Grabo or a vacuum pump already, the cost is negatable. You can get into it for a little over $100. If you've got to buy a vacuum pump or this kind of a setup, it's about the price of a handful of decent clamps. It's not astronomical to try. And I would really encourage you to give it a shot. There's all kinds of crazy fun things that you can do with this, and we have a lot more crazy fun things planned for this technology.